This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. Now the word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. That is Jeremiah 1, 4-5. Guys, I'm so thankful to be here with you today. This is the first episode that I've recorded, where I have an actual agenda, I guess, since the time I told you I was kind of coming back and we took our little bit of a lull. But I just wanted to say a quick thank you to our donors again. So as I described to you the last time I came to you with a prepared episode, which was a couple of weeks ago, that whenever I took my 2 or 3 week hiatus there to kind of deal with things that were going on in my extended family and things like that, we lost a lot of donors. And it was really unfortunate to see that every single day I was getting emails saying that we had lost monthly donors. And whenever I did my kind of announcement that, hey, I'm back, I'm not leaving, I didn't kill anybody, I didn't have an affair, I didn't do any of these crazy things that people were thinking, that, we got some donors back, but we're still losing donors. And so I just want to put myself in the right brain space and be like, look, I'm thankful for anyone that is parting with their hard-earned dollars to donate to us, no matter the circumstances. It is disappointing to see that so many people left because of what they thought or what they didn't think, or because I took 2 weeks off, and that's just certainly not something that they can stand. But we're just so thankful to anyone that has stuck with us and any of the new donors that have come on board. But I did want to say one thing real quick. It is really hard to use Facebook. I know, complete, out of left field, complete hard right turn. But I discovered whenever I was kind of going through the craziness of some stuff that happened about a month ago, I went into my Facebook somehow and I found that apparently I don't know how to use it when it comes to a business page. So I found tons and tons and tons of unread Facebook messages from you guys. And I kind of pride myself in responding to every email myself and every DM myself. And on Instagram, it's really easy to see those DMs, but on Facebook, it is really, really, really difficult. And so around the time I was getting a lot of hey, we're here for you, we're praying for you, my family's here for you, messages, I found all those. And then I found this incredible backlog of messages that went back well into last year. And so I just want to tell you guys, I just deleted my whole backlog of messages on Facebook. And so if you didn't get a response from me, I'm not being rude. I'm not big timing you. I just saw it and I was like, there's literally no way I'll be able to respond to all these messages. And some of the posts, some of you would respond with a message to an Instagram story or something like that would go to Facebook. And so the story's long gone. So I didn't even know what the message was referring to. So just want to throw that out there for any of you guys that have been sitting there for weeks or months or maybe longer. Why is Kyle not responding to my message? That's why I didn't even know it was there. So I'm so sorry, but I've deleted the backlog. I'll try to keep up with it from here on out. But your best bet is to DM me on Instagram or to send me an email. You can go to our website, just Undaunted.Life. I think it's /contact, or you can just go to the contact page and send me an email, and I will definitely get that. Also, I know a lot of you guys want to see me speak live and you want to know, hey, when are you speaking live, when you're speaking to different groups? It's not always, appropriate for me to advertise where I'm speaking and what I'm going to be doing. But on May the 17th, I have a huge opportunity for you guys, and I'm so excited to do this. I will actually be speaking live from Church of 1122 there in Jacksonville. That's at the San Pablo campus. That is their main campus. That's where Joby does his live preaching and all that. I will be presenting my Defeating Pro-Abortion Arguments talk. And so typically when I'm asked to speak, it's on the pro-life subject, on anti-abortion stuff, and then also to men's groups. And so I'm super happy to do those. But Joby wanted me to kind of help be part of the 1010 Life thing that they're doing. One of the initiatives is helping people be pro-life from womb to tomb, and what does that mean? And part of supporting that is giving you the tools that you need to defeat pro-abortion arguments when they come up. Whether that's with family or in the classroom or just with friends or just in general, I give you the tools that you need in order to stand up for life in a way that is still honoring God. So again, that's at the Church of 1122 San Pablo campus on Friday, May the 17th. That's 14286 Beach Boulevard, number 2 in Jacksonville, Florida. Again, just, Google, Church of 1122 San Pablo campus and you'll get there. We're going to be getting some more information about how you can RSVP. I think it starts at 7 or 7:30. We're still kind of figuring all that out logistically because there's a lot going on during that certain time period, graduation, different things like that. But if you are anywhere near Jacksonville on May the 17th, make sure that you put that on your calendar, that evening, you're going to spend that evening with me. Now, before we get into the main topic from today and get into the quick hitters and all that, I wanted to share with you one of the greatest emails that we have ever gotten since we launched Undaunted.Life in 2016. And again, I tell you all the time, I try not to be hyperbolic. Like, I don't want to be hyperbolic. I don't want to be seen as being hyperbolic because I'm kind of extreme anyway. But I'm going to leave the sender as anonymous. And I got this email, I don't know, back in January or February, and I've been wanting to share it with you, but now it was just kind of the most appropriate time. But let me share this short email with you. Hey, Kyle, I just wanted to thank you and tell you how your podcast has influenced my life. I started listening to you 3 years ago when I was 17. I was newly saved. I had just repented of homosexuality and pornography, but I was still effeminate and I didn't know how to be a real man. Excuse me. I also leaned liberal. 3 years later, I'm married to a woman. Don't worry. God has completely healed me. I believe that you've helped me see how awesome it is to be a man and how awesome it is to stand up for righteousness. I just wanted to encourage you and let you know that you are in my prayers. And so I remember when I got that email, I immediately shot it off to all the Forging Table guys, because it's like, guys, this is why we do it. Because we get a lot of compliments on the Forging Table and kind of like our style of how we do things. But it's emails like that, because again, I don't know who's listening. Like, I don't know what you're going through. And that was one of the interesting things about when I did announce this temporary hiatus in my content. I got a lot of emails and a lot of DMs from guys that I had never seen their names, guys that had never reached out to us on any way, shape, or form, that were just like, dude, the content means so much to me. God has shown me this, via your podcast and via this and that. And again, I just want to be a conduit. I'm not reading this email to be like, hey guys, Kyle Thompson, I'm the best. Like, you need to follow me and do whatever I say. I want you guys to follow me as I follow Christ. And if, Joe B. Martin taught me this, but it's like, Satan, when he's described, I believe in Ezekiel, Satan, Lucifer, was a worship leader in heaven, but he got tired of being looked through and wanted to be looked to, right? I don't ever want to get tired of being looked through, because the thing is when Undaunted.Life is done, which, guys, we're not going to be done for a long time unless God takes me home. But when Undaunted.Life is done, when our day comes and when my day comes or whatever that happens, and this stuff is just left over for you guys ad infinitum until the rapture or something like that, I want you to look through Kyle Thompson. I want you to look through Undaunted.Life, a Man's Podcast. I want you to look through the Forging Table, through the content that we put out on social media, and see Christ. And if we start veering away from that, I would hope I got a lot of guys in my foxhole that would help correct that. Now, today in the Quick Hitters, let me just tell you about this whole episode. So I wrote this entire episode the week my life kind of fell apart, and I got some news that I'd never thought I would ever have to deal with and all that. And so I just scrapped the episode. I'm like, I'm never going to record this thing. And then I went back and I was like, no, the main subject I'm going to be talking about today needs to be talked about, but also these quick hitters. So I've got, a handful, 5 or 6 quick hitters today. All of these things are going to be old news for some of you, but they're all very, very important. And one thing that I've noticed when I look at my data, there are a lot of people in my audience that listen to the episode immediately when it comes out, on Tuesday morning or Thursday morning or Sunday morning or whatever. But then there's a healthy amount of you guys that are listening to this weeks or months later. I even have guys that discover this show and they will go all the way back to episode 1, right? That we recorded in 2017, and they're working their way through the backlog. And so all of the stuff that we're going to be covering today is pertinent, even though it may not be like right on the tip of your brain in terms of the news cycle. Next week, we're going to be releasing some more stuff with some kind of old news, some kind of new news, and some other big topics. But so I just want to kind of give you a heads up on that, where you're like, didn't this happen months ago? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. But there's some good stuff to talk about. So here's what we're going to cover in the quick hitters today. Laken Riley being murdered on the UGA campus by an illegal immigrant. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas getting impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives, the anti-white bias of Google's new Gemini AI software, an MSNBC contributor accidentally figuring out what God-given rights are. I love that one. A U.S. airman committing suicide by self-immolation outside of an Israeli embassy, and co-President Biden's attempt to buy votes by, quote-unquote, forgiving over $1 billion of student loan debt. But today, the main thrust of what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about in vitro fertilization, or IVF. So here I am trying to make sure to set the donors at ease and get some of you donors to come back. And so how about we talk about a very incendiary topic? But around the same time that one of my extended family members was on the journey of infertility, which I know there are guys in our audience today that are on that journey, and it's brutal. It can be brutal. I read the book, What to Say When: The Complete New Guide to Discussing Abortion by Sean Carney and Steve Carlin. So those guys work for 40 Days for Life. Sean Carney actually launched 40 Days for Life. This would have been in 2021. I interviewed both of them on the show. It's a good interview. If I can remember, I'll put that in the show notes. And I also remember that being a very, very good book, a very practical book about these different pro-life topics and these pro-abortion arguments and kind of how to engage with them. And it kind of helped me, even though I had already created my abortion talk, to kind of, sharpen the sword in a few different areas. But I get to chapter 11 of that book. Again, the book, I'll put it in the show notes, is called What to Say When, The Complete New Guide to Discussing Abortion. Chapter 11, the title of that chapter is IVF, Surrogacy, and Other Artificial Reproductive Technologies. And I can put myself back in that brain space of 2021, and I remember thinking, what's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with these things? Like, that was the first time I'd ever had to reckon with the realities of the IVF process and the moral implications of it. It had just never been brought up. And again, guys, I had read seemingly every pro-life thing I could get my hands on. I'd looked at all of these different philosophies. I created this talk, and it's just like I'd never reckoned with IVF. Now, I do want to say a few things here from the beginning, okay? Obviously, if you followed us for any length of time, you know that we don't avoid controversial or upsetting topics on this show. We don't. We lean into them, okay? And the reason why we lean in is for your benefit. So this episode today and this topic is very, very likely going to overtake my pit bull stance as my most controversial and my least liked take in the history of this show, which is fine. Now, I know that many of you in this audience have been able to conceive because of in vitro fertilization. And I praise God for the growth of your family in that way. Any child conceived and born is a blessing. Any child, okay? My personal extended family has been expanded because of IVF. I know that many of you see IVF as an answer to prayer. And if you are one of those people, I would just urge you, please do not skip this commentary today, because perhaps at some point you're going to hear something that you don't like. You're not going to like a quote, or you're not going to like something that I'm saying. Please, please, please stick with me until the end of my comments. Also, this is very important because, again, I'm always open to critique, and sorry for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm like screwing around with these new in-ears. I think I'm going to go back to headphones. These things suck. But anyway, please save yourself the trouble of sending me your IVF story after you listen to this episode or watch it. Just please don't do that, because your personal anecdote or experience with IVF simply cannot change the truths that I'm going to share with you today. And it won't change my opinion on this issue. I have a very full-fledged philosophy on this issue now. I didn't years ago, but I do now. So I'm just warning you, there's nothing that you're going to say about your anecdotal IVF experience that's going to change what I'm going to share with you today, okay? Because the reality is that most Christians and pro-lifers, whether they are, intimately familiar with IVF or not, most of them simply have not thought through the moral ramifications of this fertility treatment. So that's why we're digging in today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into that. So all this came about because an Alabama Supreme Court ruling that happened, I think this would have been January or February now, has led to a lot of discussion around IVF. So some of it is good and helpful, but a lot of it has been ignorant and unhelpful. So I'm going to read from an article from the Daily Wire, and it's entitled, I'll put this in the show notes, Alabama Supreme Court says couples can continue wrongful death lawsuit over destruction of frozen embryos. So here's the article. The Alabama Supreme Court ruled late last week, this would have been, again, months ago, that frozen embryos should be recognized and protected as unborn children, as several couples sue a fertility clinic over the destruction of frozen embryos. In an 8-1 ruling, the court said that the state's Wrongful Death of a Minor Act applies to frozen embryos because the law protects all children regardless of their location. The justices rooted their decision in the clause of Alabama's Constitution that says that the public policy of the state is to uphold the sanctity of unborn life. Here, the text of the Wrongful Death and Minor Act is sweeping and unqualified. It applies to all children born and unborn without limitation, wrote Justice J. Mitchell in the majority decision. It is not the role of this court to craft a new limitation based on our view or what is not wise public policy. That is especially true where, as here, the people of this state have adopted a constitutional amendment directly aimed at stopping the courts from excluding unborn life from legal protection. The ruling came after 3 couples sued the Center for Reproductive Medicine in Mobile after 5 frozen embryos from the couples were accidentally destroyed. They sued for wrongful death after the embryos were dropped after being moved out of one part of the clinic. The couples appealed the decision to the Supreme Court after a lower court dismissed their claims. Due to the new ruling, the couple's request for punitive damages will go back to the Mobile Circuit Court. The lone dissent came from Justice Greg Cook, who criticized the majority decision by saying that it would curtail IVF in the state. And so when that broke, I remember it being, a lot of people were responding to that. There was obviously wailing and gnashing of teeth among leftists and liberals because, again, they don't believe that, a lot of them don't even believe life is worthy of life after you're born, but they certainly don't believe life is worthy of protection if you're a, frozen embryo or something like that. But the thing that was almost more concerning than that is that there were many so-called pro-lifers or pro-life conservatives, including Donald Trump, that came out to express concern over this ruling out of an abundance of concern for people potentially not being able to access IVF services in the state of Alabama and what that could potentially look like for the rest of the country. Then you saw the Alabama House of Representatives almost immediately passed a bill to protect IVF providers in the state. So the bill would give immunity to IVF providers from lawsuits. And the point of the bill was to make sure that IVF facilities would reopen because they closed right after this happened. Because when the ruling came out, they wanted to make sure that they could still, operate and be in business. And that bill in the Alabama House of Representatives passed 94-6. 94-6. And the Alabama Senate is considering another bill, and I'm not really sure where that's at currently in that process. But much more is going to be decided as it pertains to that stuff in the coming months, and so we'll try to keep you up to date on that. But one thing that became abundantly clear is that many, many people don't really know what IVF is or what it entails. That was just abundantly clear. So I want to give you a brief description here that I got directly from the Mayo Clinic. So if you got a problem with the Mayo Clinic, then I don't really know what to tell you, but I wanted to give you kind of the most reputable source I could find on this. So this is directly from their website. I will kind of, go in and out, but it will be in the show notes so you can check it for yourself. Again, Mayo Clinic. In vitro fertilization, also called IVF, is a complex series of procedures that can lead to pregnancy. It's a treatment for infertility, a condition in which you can't get pregnant after at least a year of trying for most couples. IVF also can be used to prevent passing on genetic problems to a child. During in vitro fertilization, mature eggs are collected from ovaries and fertilized by sperm in a lab. Then a procedure is done to place one or more of the fertilized eggs, called embryos, in a uterus, which is where babies develop. One full cycle of IVF takes about 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes these steps are split into different parts and the process can take longer. In vitro fertilization is the most effective type of fertility treatment that involves the handling of eggs or embryos and sperm. Together, this group of treatments is called assisted reproductive technology. IVF can be done using a couple's own eggs and sperm, or it may involve eggs, sperm, or embryos from a known or unknown donor. In some cases, a gestational carrier, someone who has an embryo implanted in the uterus, might be used. Your chances of having a healthy baby using IVF depends on many factors, such as your age and the cause of infertility. What's more, IVF involves getting procedures that can be time-consuming, expensive, and invasive. If more than one embryo is placed in the uterus, it can result in a pregnancy with more than one baby. This is called multiple pregnancy. So this link, guys, goes into way, way, way more detail, but I just wanted to kind of give you a brief overview. Again, I will put that link in the show notes. Now, in the years leading up to this, but also because of this Alabama Supreme Court decision, I've done a lot of reflecting on this personally, okay? So I've gathered a lot of opinions. I've listened to and read a bunch of perspectives on IVF, but I really do think that Sean Carney and Steve Carlin did an amazing job in their book, What to Say When, explaining the problems with IVF. So what I've decided to do today on this podcast is to read large excerpts from chapter 11 of that book for your benefit. Again, I urge you to go buy the book because these sections I'll be reading have a lot of citations in the bibliography in the back of that book, and I'm kind of going to be skipping around a little bit, but they have multiple points here. So here's point 1 from chapter 11 of that book. Artificial reproductive technologies destroy and dehumanize newly created children. So let's read the book here. For every child successfully brought to birth through an IVF treatment, many more typically lose their lives during the process. A typical IVF cycle might create 8 human embryos. Of those 8 human lives, it's likely only 1 or 2 will survive to birth. What happens to the rest? Newly created embryos spend their first 5 to 6 days growing in a laboratory. At least half and as many as 70% of those embryos die by day 6. Once an embryo is transferred to the mother, the likelihood of the child being lost to an ectopic pregnancy, a condition that is also dangerous for the mother, doubles, or triples. Only about a third of IVF cycles result in a live birth, meaning the most likely outcome of a single cycle is that all 8 embryos die. Even if a child does make it through the process to birth, perinatal outcomes are still significantly worse for babies conceived using IVF compared with naturally conceived babies. IVF is expensive, with conservative estimates putting the cost at around $20,000 per cycle. With nearly 2/3 of IVF cycles failing to bring a child to birth, a family can easily rack up many tens of thousands of dollars in medical bills. The high cost of IVF leads many IVF clients to, quote, hedge their bets, unquote, by creating more embryos than necessary. For example, of the 8 embryos created, as many as 4 will survive to day 6. But the IVF doctor might transfer only 1 or 2 to the mother's womb. Again, what happens to the rest? Some are frozen to be saved for later. Because storage fees for frozen embryos can exceed $1,000 a year, many are abandoned. Some are destroyed and discarded. Some are given to other infertile couples, and the rest are killed so that their tissue can be harvested for research purposes. These are unique individual human beings we're talking about. Dr. Craig Sweet said that more than 1 in every 5 embryos he has created via IVF has been abandoned. We weren't prepared for any of this, he admitted. Because fertility clinics are not required to disclose how many frozen embryos they store, nobody knows how many tiny frozen people live in a sort of suspended animation in laboratories across America. One study suggested, again guys, this was years ago, but one study suggested the number could be as high as 1.4 million. If all those embryos were gathered into one place, it would become the 8th most populous city in the country between San Antonio and San Diego. Not only do IVF doctors create more embryos than might be necessary, they often play the odds by implanting multiple embryos into the mother's womb during a single cycle, aware that some of them might not survive the pregnancy. But sometimes most or all of the embryos do successfully implant. If a mother is pregnant with triplets, quadruplets, quintuplets, or even more babies, IVF doctors often advise a multi-fetal pregnancy reduction or a selective reduction, where an abortion doctor uses an ultrasound to kill all but 1 or 2 of the unborn babies. These abortions sometimes go wrong, killing all of the babies. Bearing too many babies isn't the only reason some of the created embryos are willingly destroyed. Many parents pursuing IVF screen their children both before and after implantation so that any children with disabilities or genetic abnormalities can be destroyed before birth. And now we're going to go into point 2. Artificial reproductive technologies exploit women and children. Again, back to the book. Children created by artificial reproductive technologies literally become property. Amidst a high-profile custody battle over a client's unused embryos, one attorney issued a statement illustrating the cold commodification of IVF. That genetic material, for frozen children, was created pursuant to a written agreement that required both parties' written consent to attempt to create a pregnancy. The biomedical research industry has also turned artificial conceived children into property. More than 1,000 patents have been issued for cell lines derived from babies conceived in fertility clinics and later destroyed for research purposes. The exploitation of artificially created children is built into the very language of the industry. Websites marketing artificial reproduction to prospective clients discuss how many embryos to use and what to do with the unused embryos. Artificial reproduction values children not for their inherent worth, but as products to be acquired. That's why women who sell their eggs can command top dollar if they have the quote-unquote right physical features, ethnicity, and even SAT scores. Okay? So, in addition to that, again, you got to go get the book, What to Say When. It will be in the show notes. You can check it out for yourself. But I also want to give you some insight from the great Albert Mohler, who has talked about this subject matter extensively on his podcast, The Briefing, several times this year, in fact, but also in the past on his podcasts and in blogs and things like that. I'll link to all the episodes that he's done this year in the show notes, but I'm going to read for you sections from his episode that he recorded and released on Tuesday, February the 20th of this year. Again, this is from The Briefing by Albert Mohler on Tuesday, February the 20th of this year. This is fundamentally important. And this gets to the basic principle of Christian thinking in the Christian worldview, and that is the fact that when you're dealing with objective truth, that objective truth does not depend upon the context. It is objectively true that a human embryo is a human person bearing human dignity made in the image of God. And it doesn't matter at what stage of development that human embryo or later fetus or later baby or later old man might be. That person, whether male or female, regardless of age or other circumstances, is made in God's image and is so undeniably. But the language that was used in the majority opinion in that Alabama Supreme Court decision is remarkable because of the insertion of the phrase physical location. That is to say that children are children, unborn children are children, without exception based on the developmental stage, physical location, or any other ancillary characteristics. Physical location is key there because at no previous moment in human history did anyone need to say that. Guess what? We need to say it now. The physical location here has to do with the fact that there are those who had argued publicly that if the embryo is in the mother's womb, then it's protected. But if it's anywhere else, it's not. Nonsense. Abject nonsense, said the Alabama Supreme Court. That human being is a human being regardless of developmental stage or physical location. Whether in the womb or in a freezer, a human embryo is a human being, period. The hard thing is that many who consider themselves pro-life have refused to extend their own logic to the huge moral crisis posed by IVF procedures. The blunt and unavoidable question is this: do pro-lifers really believe what they say? Do they really believe that unborn children are children? If not, then we've been lying to ourselves and to everyone else. But if we really do believe this, how do we reckon with the fact that there are millions of frozen children locked in indefinite freeze and destined for destruction due to the IVF procedures? By the way, it's not just destined for destruction. Many of them are being now routinely destroyed. In one headline news story coming out of Great Britain, thousands were destroyed in the name of medical ethics, simply because room needed to be made. And furthermore, there were questions about the aging of the embryos. Just think about that for a moment. Now, Christians don't often think through these issues very carefully, but Christians need to understand that when God creates something and he gives us something as a moral good, if we try to alienate parts of that good, we create either moral disaster or the opportunity for it. Let's think of it this way. Any alienation from the right context brings moral risk. Donor sperm or eggs, that brings risks. IVF, in vitro fertilization technology, furthers that risk by alienating the gift of life from the conjugal act itself. We'll just leave it at that. You're alienating the gift of life from that context, a physical union at the very least. The same technology can be used to allow a heartbroken young married couple the promise of pregnancy and a baby. Can by so-called donor gametes be used by a same-sex couple or even a single woman to have a child? Just think of the technology. Once that technology is available, it's not only available to married couples, that is to say a man and woman in marriage who are hoping and praying for a child. The technology now creates a context in which the alienation of this process of having a child from the context of marriage means that it is alienated from the context of marriage. If it's alienating for one, it's alienated, at least potentially, for all. Thanks to IVF, the entire process can now be made into a marketplace with babies as commodities. It can start out as a marketplace with gametes, sperm, and eggs, and now you can go to many cities, especially close to medical centers and medical schools, close to large American universities, and you can find the ads going both ways. I've seen them with my own eyes. The ads go one way, trying to buy the cells, advertising for donors for sperm and eggs, and then the market goes the other way. If you're looking for sperm or an egg, or for that matter, if you're looking for an embryo, now you can go to different commercial outfits that are offering basically catalogs. You want blue eyes? You want brown hair? What is it that you're looking for? Male or female? It is turning human beings into a commodity. Let me be absolutely clear. And here we need some real clear Christian thinking. Christians welcome every human life, every single baby, and we celebrate that life. The baby's not responsible for the circumstances of the baby's own fertilization or his or her birth. Every single human being is simply to be welcomed by Christians as a gift from God. That does not bless every context in which a baby is brought into the world. Just to state the obvious, there are all kinds of sexual sins that can bring a baby into this world. That sin does not mean that the baby is in any sense less to be celebrated and welcomed, but it also means that the sin is not itself to be celebrated or normalized. But even as a baby's a moral good, a person made in God's image, not every technology or medical procedure, or for that matter, sexual act, is made legitimate simply because it leads to babies. If it is true, and I assure you that it is true, then evangelicals had better make certain our affirmation of human dignity is clear, our affirmation of the sanctity of human life is unconditional, and it comes down to what should be very understandable to all Christians. All unborn children, all of them, are children. It is so often true that a part of our responsibility is to see the deep inconsistencies on the secular side and to understand that sometimes those who are thinking that way do not see the inconsistencies. But we also recognize as Christians, sometimes we need to be confronted with our own inconsistencies. And on this issue, many who consider themselves pro-life have been, up to now, deeply inconsistent. That's going to have to change, or else the world is going to make us face the fact that we didn't mean what we said all along. So Albert Mohler has he has this propensity for dropping the hammer sometimes, and he absolutely dropped the hammer when it came to this. And I'll read one last thing. So if you hate hearing me read out loud, just one more thing that you have to live through. But Lila Rose, who is from Live Action, the founder of Live Action, a great pro-life organization who's been on the show multiple times, she sent a letter via her email list around the time that this Alabama Supreme Court decision went down. So I want to read a portion of that email here to you. To understand what happened in Alabama, important distinctions must be made. The court did not say that embryos have full constitutional rights. Recognizing the human dignity of embryos who are negligently killed is a step in the right direction. But in Alabama's ruling, this only applies to embryos who were wrongfully killed, not those who were intentionally or inevitably killed. Infertility can be an incredibly painful burden and is increasingly common, but the solution cannot be to deny legal protections to human embryos or to allow them to be frozen or killed at will in America's IVF industry. The recent Alabama Supreme Court decision didn't grant these babies constitutional rights. It should have, but it did say, at minimum, if a fertility clinic recklessly allows those babies to be destroyed, the parents can sue. The fact that politicians on either side of the aisle are chastising the court defies reason and justice. A human life has human rights, equally, whether conceived naturally or via IVF, and deserves the same human rights to not be killed as a born baby does. I wish the Alabama court said embryos have equal status under the law like any other child, that you cannot kill them, manipulate them, or do medical experiments on them. More concern is being shown about lawsuits than about respecting and saving innocent human lives. We must think about the lives being lost here. Truthfully, even the word frozen can give a dehumanizing connotation, and the act of freezing is one of the reasons why IVF is such a morally fraught process. Leaving human beings frozen for years violates their dignity. Additionally, the practice of IVF is riddled with risks. Millions of embryos have been killed in the process of trying to bring about successful pregnancies, or donated and killed during science experiments. Those who were created through IVF can suffer negative emotional and physical side effects such as survivor's guilt, increased risk of hospital admission, perinatal mortality, cerebral palsy, and other birth defects. For embryos already created in this way, the reality is that these are little babies, just a few weeks old. It's a biological fact that a human embryo is someone's son or daughter. Even if created outside of the loving union of a husband and a wife, children created through IVF contain value and inherent dignity equal to any other baby. If the baby in utero at 3 weeks old is a human, the baby in a petri dish at 3 weeks old is human too. Human rights are universal and inalienable, and every human possesses the right to life. Each person, from the tiniest embryo to an elder nearing the end of life, has incalculable value and deserves guaranteed legal protection. The foundational moral truth that human life begins at the moment of fertilization is written on our hearts and backed up by basic science found in any biological textbook. The federal Constitution's 14th Amendment guarantees that every person has equal protection under the law, including preborn children, and specifically including preborn children created by IVF. We must keep fighting until this protection is recognized and applied in every circumstance. So thank you to Sean Carney and Steve Carlin, and to Albert Mohler, and to Lila Rose, and to all the other peoples whose opinions that even disagreed with them kind of helped me coalesce everything into the last thing that I want to talk about here. And it's that here are the four main problems as I see it as it pertains to IVF. Number one, it almost always results in the death of image bearers of God. Number two, it commodifies human beings. Number three, it removes procreation from the conjugal union. And number four, it opens the door for same-sex couples to conceive their own children. Okay, so let's go ahead and break into all these one by one. Again, you heard some of these sentiments echoed in the stuff that I read here recently. All of these problems, guys, they're just deeply problematic as it pertains to morality from a Christian worldview. But let's dig in a little deeper. The first one, almost always, this process of IVF almost always results in the death of image bearers of God. And I use the word almost, but if you're going through IVF and you go through a cycle of 8 children, unless you have 8 children via that process, or you plus the other people that you've donated the embryos to or whatever, unless all of those babies come to term, you have participated in the death and murder of human beings. Now, I want to be careful here because there are men and women that are getting pregnant naturally that suffer miscarriages. My wife and I technically have 4 children. James and Eli are here, but before James was born, we lost 2 children. And it's terrible. And it's deeply painful and it's confusing, especially if you're a guy, because you don't have that connection to what was, temporarily growing inside of the body of your wife. But a lot of you have suffered that. But when you go through the process of IVF, you are essentially saying, I am okay with creating image bearers of God that will be sacrificed to my preference to have a live birth and to have a baby here with me. That's absolutely what happens. Again, I'm not familiar even anecdotally with any story of somebody creating a certain amount of embryos and all of them turned out to be born into this world. I just don't know of that scenario. Which goes to the second thing here, that it commodifies human beings. Because again, take the scenario, a couple that's struggling with fertility or infertility, however you want to word it, they create 8 embryos. That's kind of the typical amount. And let's say they have 3 children because of that. They have triplets. Let's just say they got it all in one shebang, right? But then the other 5, they donate. Because a lot of these clinics will say, obviously if they're in more red states or if they're pretending to be like a Christian IVF facility, they're like, we don't destroy any embryos. They're all donated and blah, blah, blah. Let's say that you do that. Just the process of donating the embryos you've created using your egg and your sperm as a couple allows a commodification of that human being. Because you think you're doing something altruistic, right? You're donating these embryos that you just didn't want. You just didn't want to use them. You're donating them to another couple that's going through the same struggle you and, your spouse is going through. You've commodified them. These are human beings. These aren't even like dogs, right? Maybe you have some dogs and they have a litter of puppies and you want to keep 1 or 2 and you want to get rid of the other 5 or 6. That makes sense. Those are beings, but those are beings that don't have the moral weight and heft of a human being created in the image of God. And so you do have these clinics that literally will produce you a catalog. You can see what the IQ is of the sperm donor or the egg donor, right? You can check it out and say like, hey, this person was a good athlete. The male, the sperm donor was a good athlete and the female was like a Rhodes Scholar. And so you put that together and you say, well, that's what I want. You go shopping, right? If you're not using your own eggs and your own sperm, you're using this entire process as a commodity. Again, that may have not been the point from the beginning, but the reason why these clinics are desperately wanting to stay in business is because it's very lucrative. Why is it lucrative? Because they're providing a commodity and a service to people. So the third thing here is it removes procreation from the conjugal union. So this can go all the way back to just the sexual revolution. So with birth control, with the sexual revolution, with condoms and different, diaphragms and different things that prevent you from getting pregnant. It's like, okay, we want to have as much sex as possible with as many people as possible, but we don't want to have, the potential consequence of one of those icky children be a part of it, right? So just in general as a culture, because of the sexual revolution, we have removed procreation from the conjugal union to begin with, right? And all of us, I would say, and listening in this audience are guilty of it. I mean, my wife and I, we were using birth control for over a decade because we just didn't want to have kids yet. So we have to reckon with kind of what that looks like as well. And that's one of the things that the Catholics seem to get right. There's like, yeah, we're not doing that. Like we're not doing that at all. Like if you're married, procreation is one of God's blessings that could be on the back end of the conjugal union, right? But it just completely removes that. Because you could technically, I mean, I'm sure if something like this has happened, you could not have sex at all with your spouse and then create a child. Like, do you see the problem with that? That's not what God wants for you. Part of the process is so that we can be fruitful, multiply, and propagate the species, right? But it's also God showing you his love for you, that he would even give you that. Again, I go back in the day when Matt Chandler was like, isn't it crazy that God gave us taste buds? Can you imagine just eating without taste buds? But it's a gift. But for women and men, there are pleasure centers and nerve endings and things like that that make the conjugal union a fun process and a process that feels great for both parties. But when you remove that from procreation, you're removing the point, right? So I won't belabor the point any further. I'll go to my last one here. This opens the door for same-sex couples to conceive their own children. I use scare quotes around the word own. I remember the first time I even thought about this and heard about it. It was back in the day, 10 plus years ago, when I was watching the show Modern Family. And so there's a gay couple in that, and they wanted to have a child, right? So they had already adopted a child, but they wanted to have their own child, right? And so they were going to, and I don't know because I stopped watching the show, so I don't know if they ended up doing this or what, but they were going to do something called the swirl. So they each were going to masturbate and, jizz into a cup, and they were going to give that to a lab, and they were going to take each of the partner's sperm and they were going to swirl it and then take one of the sperm cells to basically fertilize an egg that was given by a donor so that neither guy would know who the actual father was, right? So it's kind of supposed to be this thing is like, oh, we don't want someone to know, regardless, we don't want them to know who the dad is, but, we still want to have this baby. I think at the time in that episode, for whatever season it was, they decided against doing that. But that is what gay couples are doing all over the world now. They're doing the swirl, and then they're getting a donated egg, and they're having that fertilized, and they're placing it into the rented womb of a woman, furthering the commodification of human beings in this process. A woman is not a mother, she's a womb. There was an absolutely heartbreaking video that I saw last week. There was a woman who was a surrogate, two gay fathers, and they have this little girl who's probably 4 or 5 years old. And so apparently the woman, the surrogate, who these gay men bought and, or rented, I guess you could say, they rented this woman's womb temporarily so that they can have their DNA injected plus an egg into this woman. And this woman carried this baby, gave birth to this baby, and it was immediately stolen from her. This little girl's mother was stolen from her. But they still have a relationship. These two gay fathers and their supposed daughter have a relationship with the surrogate mother. And so there's a FaceTime video of this mother wishing her a happy birthday. I think it was her 4th birthday, and talking about, your daddies love you so much, and so do I, and blah, 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 and all that. And then it goes to the girl, and it's so upsetting. It's so unbelievably upsetting. The little girl says, "I love you, mommy." And the gay couple's like, "What did you say?" She's like, "I love you, mommy." How unbelievably heartbreaking. Not only that little girl is going to be raised in the milieu of this homosexual, abominable lifestyle, but she's being kept from her mother. Except via FaceTime. That little girl deserves a mom and a dad in a exclusive fidelity relationship of a marriage. That's what that little girl deserves. And we live in a broken world, and there's all kinds of different setups that we've been raised in and that you may even be in right now. That's what that little girl deserves. But because these selfish, narcissistic, homosexual couples wanted a, basically accessory for their life, and they didn't feel like a dog would basically, check the box, they had to go through the commodification process, used IVF and surrogacy to produce a child to specifically keep her away from her mother. That's a damnable thing, an absolutely damnable thing. So guys, as a Christian, again, most of you listening to this are Christians today. If you're not a Christian, we're so glad that you're here. But as a Christian specifically, I'm talking to you. You should not use nor support the use of IVF because of the reasons that I listed above. You just can't. Again, kind of the 4 main reasons, I'll say them again. It almost always results in the death of image bearers of God. We'll just say that it results in the death of image bearers of God. It commodifies human beings, it removes procreation from the conjugal union, and it opens the door for same-sex couples to conceive their own children. Also, if you consider yourself to be legitimately pro-life, you should not use nor support the use of IVF because of the reasons I listed above. You just can't. If you're a Christian, you cannot support it. If you are legitimately pro-life, you can't support it. But I do want to give a message here at the end, for those of you still with me, to those in the audience that are experiencing infertility. Man, that sucks. It absolutely sucks. I'm heartbroken for you, and I'm heartbroken for the people in my life that I know that are currently going through this. But a few things that I would give to you. Trust God in this process, and trust God to provide. Easy for me to say though, right? Kyle, you haven't gone through what I've gone through. You haven't had to look your wife in the eye every month when she looks at that test and it says not pregnant. You haven't had to do that. And you're somewhat right, because my wife and I didn't just get pregnant every time we wanted to. there were months and months and months where we're like, oh no, like is something wrong here? So I do know to a degree what that feels like. And it's always hard when you're on the outside looking in on someone else's situation to just tell them, hey, just trust God, you're good. But it's the truth. It's the right advice. Trust God to provide. But also, swallow the hard truth that God's answer to your infertility prayers might be not now, not yet, or even no. Again, when we say God answers a prayer, we typically frame it as God gave me exactly what I wanted. And you're like, God answered prayers. But God answers prayers all the time. Sometimes, not now, not yet, or no. Or not for you. Or you're not going to get it, but just no. And so I know that's hard to hear. It's hard for me to even say, but that is the reality of prayer with God. Which leads to the next point, which is that there are hundreds of thousands of children that need good moms and dads like you will be. Because if you're sad during the infertility process, almost inherently there's a Christian morality there that you're so desperate to have progeny and to have human beings to care for, to raise up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. It's almost like an unsaid thing there. But AdoptionNetwork.com estimates that there are just under 400,000 American children in the foster care system that don't have a forever family. Just recently, I was talking with a buddy. He thought that he and his wife were not going to be able to conceive. They have conceived, but at the time we were talking about, what does that mean for y'all? Are y'all just going to be dog people your whole life? Are you just going to be vacation people your whole life? Like, are you interested in adoption? And he's like, yeah, we're absolutely interested in adoption. I always wanted to be a dad. And for some of you, you might need to expand your definition of what it means to be a dad or a mom. Because maybe you never even thought that you could be a mom or a dad to a baby that wasn't biologically yours. But we all know better. In our most sober-minded consideration of this process, we know better. You certainly can be a father or a mother to a child that doesn't have any of your DNA. You can certainly do that. So that's something to consider. But also, last thing here, the gift of life doesn't erase the sin of murder. So to people that are so desperately willing to spend tens of thousands of dollars on the IVF process because they want the gift of life, just know that you are 100% taking part in the process of the sin of murder. Again, you may not think that way. You may not even get yourself to where it even feels like manslaughter. But again, as the reality of this process, as I kind of elucidated it throughout the last 45 minutes or so, you have to understand that you are part of the process of stamping out image bearers of Christ, image bearers of God, rather, and you just can't do that. I know the gift of life may seem tempting and you see any technological innovation to that end as a blessing, but it's just not always the case. Hey guys, real quick, as you've likely heard me talk about on the show before, it took me forever before I started taking supplements of any kind. I was always nervous about taking like whey protein and creatine or really anything beyond that because I was just afraid of what was in the product and if it was going to like give me cancer someday or something like that. And I was always scared of these companies, these supplement companies, just cutting corners and using low quality products and eventually putting things in their products that could cause problems for me and my body. So I've always wanted to partner up with an American company that uses high quality ingredients in their supplements. And that's why I want to remind you guys that we are partnered with Jocko Fuel. So Jocko Fuel is Jocko Willink's American-based supplement company. So what are some of my favorite products that they make that I also use? They have the best tasting greens powder on the market. I love the peach flavor myself. They also make whey protein powder. The banana cream is my favorite. They make energy drinks. The Jocko Go energy drinks. My favorite is currently a tie between their iced tea lemonade and their pink lemonade flavors. I also use their Creel oil, their creatine, their vitamin D, and also their sleep aids. And they make a bunch of other stuff like ready to drink protein cookies, which are actually really delicious. My boys even like them, pre-workout powder, and much, much more. Guys, if you take your health and wellness seriously, then you've got to put high quality products in your body. Try Jocko Fuel out today by going to www.jockofuel.com. That's jockofuel.com. Use the promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. Again, that's jockofuel.com, promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. All right, so let's keep going here. But just coming off of that Jocko Fuel ad, I will say that I just started using this Jocko Brain Power. So they just sent this to me. So I've never used a nootropic before. So that kind of helps with your brain. You know, this says sustained energy, supports concentration and cognitive boost. I feel pretty good. So I took these right before the podcast today. It's the first time I did anything, and I'm not like feeling any crazy tingles or like my brain's going to explode, but I do feel like I'm really concentrating. So Jocko Brain Power, they just released it. Check that out. But let's go ahead and get into the quick hitters. And again, guys, a lot of these are going to seem like old news, but we're just going to get into it. Laken Riley being murdered on the University of Georgia campus by an illegal immigrant. So this is according to the Daily Wire. Newly filed arrest affidavits in the case of the murder of Georgia nursing student Laken Riley state that the suspect, a 26-year-old illegal immigrant from Venezuela, used an object in the crime, is accused of disfiguring her skull, and is also accused of dragging her body to a secluded area to hide the fact that he had killed her. The allegation against Jose Ibarra of dragging Riley's body was filed to support the charge of concealing the death of another person. ABC News reported the affidavits estimate that Riley was killed between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. on February the 22nd. Riley, a nursing student at Augusta University's Athens campus, who was a member of the Alpha Chi Omega sorority, was memorialized at a vigil on Monday. This was a Monday in February. Laken showed devotion with every aspect of her life, said Chloe Mullins, the president of the University of Georgia chapter of Alpha Chi Omega. Doing things halfway just wasn't an option. We lost one of the brightest lights that have ever been. Ibarra was held by Border Patrol on September the 8th of 2022 after illegally entering the United States near El Paso, Texas, but was released for further processing according to the U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. ICE added that at the end of August 2023, New York police arrested him and charged him with acting in a manner to injure a child less than 17 and a motor vehicle license violation. ICE also claimed Ibarra was released before ICE had a chance to request that he be held until immigration authorities could put him in custody. So I have several big takeaways on this one, okay? I normally like to keep it to one, but I have several. First, say her name. Typically, I hate that because that's typically what we hear from wild leftists when a black person that is not innocent is killed by a white police officer. And it's like, say their name, say her name, say his name. But say her name, say Laken Riley, because she should be alive today. And it is wide open border policies that led to the reason why she's not. Okay? She was literally in the wrong place at the wrong time and lost her life for it. Another big takeaway. This is what happens when your government actively allows criminals to enter your country. I know a lot of people like to say, oh, you know, everyone who's anti-immigration is racist. Oh, everyone that says that all people coming across the border are, killers and these vagrants and just horrible criminals, that's super bad and super racist. The thing is no one's saying that. No one's saying that everyone that comes across our border illegally is a murderer. They're all lawbreakers. They know they're breaking the laws of a supposedly sovereign country. So all of them in that sense are criminals, but you don't need to be scared of all of them. There are people that are here that just want a better life. They want to make money. They want to, live the American dream, and they're just impatient. They don't want to go through the front door, right? So they come through the back door. But there is a significant number of these individuals that are horrible people, that are murderers, that have murdered people before that now are here. And every time an illegal immigrant to this country kills, hurts, or destroys the property of an American citizen, it is a travesty, an absolute travesty. And we got to be real about that. Another big takeaway, or quick takeaway, I guess, on this would be a country without strict borders has no sovereignty. And so if you have no sovereignty, you're not a country. And so there are countries all over the globe that have walls and armed men at those walls, and they enforce their borders. And even if they don't have a wall, they have a line that demarcates this is our country, over there is your country, and they have people that are protecting them. So again, we keep talking about our country, our country, our country. If we don't have borders, we don't have a country. Another big takeaway is to not be intimidated or bullied by non-Christians that love throwing out all of the sojourner scriptures. So they'll just search the word sojourner and just throw those scriptures in your face. They're plucking all of those scriptures completely out of context. So when they're talking about the sojourner, what they're trying to communicate to you is, hey, just do a univariate analysis, just listen to the words I'm saying, and if you're anti-immigrant, if you're anti-illegal immigrant, you're somehow also not a Christian. That you don't believe that a Middle Eastern Jewish construction worker died on a cross, was resurrected 3 days later, and that somehow counted for you. No. Don't look at that. Look over here. If you're anti-open borders, it's because you hate immigrants. You hate brown people. You hate whatever. Don't be intimidated and bullied by these morons that don't understand anything about the scriptures. Also, elections have consequences. I remember a lot of you telling me, I just can't have a vote for Trump on my record. Just can't do it. You know, he's been married multiple times, divorced. He's not a very moral guy. And, you know, I can't vote for him. Joe Biden doesn't seem very harmless, or he seems harmless. He doesn't seem like he's going to do anything crazy. Things are way too crazy with Trump. We got to get back to the middle. How do you feel? Do you remember people like me telling you, don't be stupid? That Joe Biden seems to be not dangerous, but is super dangerous. Do you remember that? Do you remember people saying this will have deleterious effects for the country, for the economy, for all these things? Now you're starting to realize all the polls are showing that Trump could actually become president, right? Again, I don't really understand Trump supporters that are like, they definitely stole the election in 2020, but they somehow aren't capable of doing that in 2024. But that's a subject for another day. But elections have consequences, guys. You can hate the options, but you still have to pick. Last one here before we move on to the next quick hitter. Arm yourselves and be prepared to end a threat violently if necessary. So even here recently, the FBI is warning that there are imminent terrorist threats here in this country, that sleeper cells are going to be activated and they are going to try to perform mass casualty events at mass gatherings. So specifically, I know the sheepdogs at my church, we're being a little bit more cognizant of our surroundings than normal. Some guys are bringing backpacks with things inside of them that would aid in our process of trying to end a threat if that were to take place. I remember on Easter, there was a heightened threat of terrorist attack or different attacks on places of worship, specifically Christian places of worship and Jewish places of worship. So I led my wife into the sanctuary, and then while the singing was going on, I took my own little tour of the campus. Walked around, I looked for anything that was out of sorts. Some of you might be like, well, that's just crazy. Do you not have faith that something won't happen? Burp, burp, burp. I'm like, I can't be sure. I can't be sure. Like, there's no force field around our church where somebody that wants to do harm to us isn't going to be able to come inside because they're going to be repelled by some sort of like magic. Because if you believe that, then how have there ever been people that have been murdered inside of churches, Christian places of worship? And guys, I know a lot of you, you're kind of maybe a little bit go along to get along. You don't really like the idea of violence. You've never been in a fight. You can't imagine pointing a gun at somebody and pulling the trigger. But I just want you to think about not who's in front of you in that scenario, but who's behind you. Is your wife behind you? Are your kids behind you? Are people that you know, love, and care about behind you? Are you the last line of defense between them and a wolf that wants to take them out? Because if you are, you need to learn how to deal with that situation. Hey guys, real quick. I've talked about this on the show before, but I've been experimenting with the idea of getting on the carnivore diet. And so I've got a good buddy, Chad Robichaux, who's been on the podcast, that he's been on the carnivore diet for a while. He's seen a lot of great success. But the big thing that I've been worrying about is like, where do I get high quality beef? Like, where exactly can I get beef where I can trust that's coming from a reputable source, that it doesn't have a bunch of junk that's been in it? And I've been looking for a cattle operation partner to really partner up with. And that's why I want to introduce you to the new official beef delivery partner of Undaunted.Life, and that's my friends at Primal Beef. So Primal Beef is a brand new cattle operation owned and operated by Sean Glass. So he is a retired Navy SEAL that served with Jocko Willing, and Jocko is also a partner in Primal Beef. So what makes Primal Beef different from the other fly-by-night beef delivery companies? It's a combination of the following. So it's all American Black Angus cattle. The beef comes from one farm, and that's in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. Also, the beef is all natural. There are no hormones added ever, no antibiotics ever, no mRNA ever. And here's a cool thing. After slaughter, the beef is dry aged, and then it's hand cut by artisan butchers and then flash frozen to ensure that it maintains the tenderness and marbling and flavor that you'll want by the time it gets to you. And here's another cool thing. For every box sold, guys, Primal Beef donates meat directly to a member of America's Special Operations Forces through the C4 Foundation. So you can take pride in knowing that your purchase will help literally put food on the table for one of America's finest warriors. So, are you salivating yet? Because if not, You should be. Guys, try Primal Beef out today by going to www.primalbeef.com. That will be in the show notes. That's primalbeef.com. Use the promo code Kyle. That's my first name, Kyle, Kyle, for 10% off of your order. Again, that is primalbeef.com. Use the code Kyle, Kyle, to get 10% off of your order. All right, guys, next quick hitter here. The Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas getting impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives. This is according to CBS News. The House voted to impeach Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas on Tuesday. This would have been, again, back in February, casting a historic vote that marks the first time a cabinet secretary has been impeached in nearly 150 years. Under 2 articles of impeachment accusing Mayorkas of willful and systematic refusal to comply with the law and a breach of public trust, House Republicans took the rare step toward removing Mayorkas from office on Tuesday, February the 13th. The vote came a week after the initial attempt failed. So a trial in the Senate may or may not happen. I would say it's very, very likely not going to happen. If it does, Mayorkas is not going to be impeached. Okay, so this is all kabuki theater. Like this is not literally going to happen. But let's go right to the big takeaway here. The standard for impeachment still is high crimes and misdemeanors. Okay? Which, similar to when Democrats impeached Trump twice, the threshold for impeachment charges have not been alleged nor met with Mayorkas. So Republicans need to decide if they're going to stand up for constitutional dictates and norms or meet Democrats on the battlefield of play stupid games and win stupid prizes. Okay? And I'm in the middle here, kind of. So I want constitutional norms to be upheld. Just because the other side is breaking the norms doesn't mean that you have to, right? It's like saying the devil made me do it. It's like, no, you chose to do it, right? The devil didn't make you do a damn thing. You chose to do it. But on the other side, it's like, okay, if decorum and norms have already been violated, and if this is how we're going to play now, it's like, okay, FAFO, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Let's go. Now, again, it is a waste of my taxpayer dollars and your taxpayer dollars to see your representatives do something that literally leads to nothing. The Republicans in the House have been like a ginormous circus for a while now. They just literally can't get their crap together. And so doing something that only has symbolic benefit seems to be a colossal waste of time, but we'll see how it goes into the future. All right, next quick hitter here, the anti-white bias of Google's new Gemini AI software. So this is according to Daily Wire. Google has paused its AI chatbot's image generation feature after it was accused of racism against white people. The chatbot was accused of refusing to generate images of white people after Frank Fleming, a writer for Daily Wire, scripted content, repeatedly asking the chatbot, whose next generation model Gemini 1.5 was implemented a few weeks ago, and offered image generation for such images. In a long X thread, Fleming began by asking for an image of a pope. Historically, popes have been white men, but the chatbot posted images of dark-skinned men and women. Okay, so you may have seen this story, but literally people were going into the Gemini AI chatbot just trying to get it to create an image of a white person. And so they're like, give me an image of the founding fathers. And it was like black founding fathers and Asian founding fathers of America. And it was just like, they just kept doing these things and kept doing these things. And they kept trying to manipulate the AI chatbot, which we think we can do, in order to, produce a picture of a white person. It just never did it, right? So it just got funnier and funnier. But let's go right to the big takeaway here. Artificial intelligence is not artificial. It's not. It's programmed. It is not and was never intended to be morally neutral. It reflects the worldview of its coders and designers. Why do some of you not realize this yet? Because some of you you dove deep. You're all about the artificial intelligence. Like you have an AI assistant. You have an AI person help you respond to emails. You're leaning in hard to AI, and you think it's just a tool to be used. How foolish! These tools are not morally neutral. Again, go to ChatGPT and say, tell me something good about Donald Trump, and it won't do it. If you say, tell me something good about Joe Biden, it will give you paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs as long as you keep prompting it. And you think this is neutral? You think this is just a large language model that can now be used by you to be more efficient in your business? Certainly there is a dynamic of that here, but you have to think, because people have asked me, Kyle, when are you going to start using AI for what you do? And I'm like, I'm not. Because again, let's say I got lazy And I said, all right, here's the 5 things I want to talk about on my show today. Hey, ChatGPT, just give me my notes for my show today. The people that designed and are coding these AI models and large language models and different things like that, for the most part, are not Christians. These are not people that believe in God. These are wild left-wing people, a lot of Marxist people, people that are at least communist sympathizers, if not communists themselves. And we think that magically what is produced on the back end is going to help us. I'm not saying that the ChatGPT bot can't be valuable to you, that everything it produces is negative or communist or immoral. But again, you have to realize the outputs come from the inputs. Now, there are people that think that eventually AI will become sentient and it'll be able to think of itself and it'll go way beyond all the information that's even on the internet and it's going to become its own God and all this other. Yeah, okay. Maybe at that point it's Skynet. At that point, like we're close to rapture, right? But in the meantime, realize when you're using AI, it is not morally neutral. So buyer beware. All right, next quick hitter here. An MSNBC contributor accidentally figuring out what God-given rights are. So this was fun. So this clip made the rounds a couple of months ago. So this is a clip of Heidi Przybyla, I think is how you say her last name, Heidi Przybyla. So she's an MSNBC contributor, and it's a short clip, but we'll just go ahead and get into it here. So here's the clip.
The one thing that unites all of them, because there's many different groups orbiting Trump, but the thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalists is very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God.
I love this clip every time. One of my favorite things ever is non-Christians trying to tell Christians what Christians are and what Christianity is all about. I love it. It's like, you only have a colloquial understanding of what I believe, but you're going to tell me what I believe and then tell me what I should do with those beliefs. Also, I love people that can't even define the words Christian nor nationalism, but they try to cobble together a definition of combining them into Christian nationalism and try to make it make sense. Because again, we're a world full of people that love univariate analysis. We don't like going more than one layer deep. And so someone will just say, yeah, those Christian nationalists, those MAGA Trump wearing hat guys, but they have no idea. They don't know what Christian means. They certainly don't know what Christian means, but they also don't know what nationalism means. And so it's like, word to the wise, don't combine things into a new term or phrase if you don't know what the individual terms mean, okay? Big takeaway on this one. So here's the quote. They believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from an earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God. That was Heidi's quote, which I would say, yep. Welcome to 7th grade U.S. history class, where you should have learned that the founding fathers didn't create rights, but they enshrined and protected via a constitutional document inside of a constitutional republic framework the inalienable rights all human beings have been granted by God. Again, we don't use words like inalienable anymore, but that means unable to be taken away from you or given away by the possessor. Like I can't give away my rights that God gave me. Technically, right? I can abdicate to the authority of someone else, but I can't give my rights away. And no one grants me these rights. Again, people that have a leftist worldview, they are just shocked when people are like, oh, well, yeah, I don't care what Congress says. What do you mean? That's the highest authority in the land. Oh, what do you mean you don't believe in the judicial system like what the Supreme Court has said? It's like, because I believe in a authority that is higher than that. Again, I say this all the time. Every worldview has to answer the same 4 questions. Learn this from Ravi Zacharias. Origin, meaning, morality, destiny. Origin, where do we come from? Meaning, why is everything here? Morality, what's the difference between good and evil? Destiny, where do we go when we die? So morality, what's the difference between good and evil? Well, I'm not going to go to Congress to tell me what's good and evil. Because again, the law is a teacher, but the law is not an arbiter of morality either. It certainly doesn't do that. There are literally laws on the books right now that are anti-God, that are anti-Christianity, that are anti the word of God that we find in Scripture. Namely, look at abortion. Yeah, Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey are no longer like here in this country anymore. Those were overturned a couple of years ago. But babies are literally being killed right now as I'm recording this and as you're listening to it. Right Now, there are image bearers of God that are being murdered in the womb for the sake of convenience. Do we say that's okay just because it's legal? Of course not. But again, we have these dunderheaded people that, again, this only works on something like MSNBC because people are like, yeah, those stupid Christian nationalists that think that our rights don't come from Congress or the Supreme Court. What a bunch of dummies, right? Again, some of these people are so ignorant that they can't even see it. And it's our job to help disabuse them of that. So that's partially why we're talking about it on the show and going from there. All right, next quick hitter here. I think we had a couple left. A U.S. airman committing suicide by self-immolation outside of an Israeli embassy. So this is according to the AP. An active duty member of the U.S. Air Force has died after he set himself ablaze outside of an Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., while declaring that he will no longer be complicit in genocide. The 25-year-old airman, Aaron Bushnell of San Antonio, Texas, died from his injuries, the Metropolitan Police Department said on Monday. This would have been a Monday back in February. Bushnell had walked up to the embassy shortly after 1 p.m. Sunday and began live streaming on the video streaming platform Twitch, a person familiar with the matter told the Associated Press. Law enforcement officials believe he set his phone down and then doused himself in accelerant and ignited the flames. At one point, he said he will no longer be complicit in genocide, the person said. The video was later removed from the platform, but law enforcement officials have obtained and reviewed a copy. So big takeaway here on this one. Leftism plus media gaslighting plus mental illness is a deadly combination. I do not thank God for this young man's death. I don't. But I do thank God that this man only killed himself and no one else. Because a lot of other people that are influenced by leftism, media gaslighting, and their own personal scaffolding of mental illness will try to take out a bunch of other people before they take themselves out, or they basically entice the police to do it. Again, this active duty military member was so convinced that just being a part of the United States military made him complicit in genocide when no genocide is happening. Again, a lot of people, even well-meaning, moral, right-minded people, think that's what's happening currently in Gaza is genocide. Because they look at the numbers of innocents. There are tens of thousands of non-combatants that have been killed in this war. But I want to remind you about a few things. Every drop of blood shed in this conflict is on the hands of Hamas. Even if Israel makes a mistake, ultimately they are in this war because of what Hamas did last year, killing 1,200 people, and they still have hostages currently being held. Of what status of those hostages, we have no idea. They are responsible for every drop of blood shed. Also, they are responsible even further for the deaths of their own citizenry because they are embedding themselves in that citizenry. Their main tactic is to surround themselves with non-combatants, with innocent civilians, so that even if they are killed, they will win the PR battle because idiots around the world will say, look at the horrible things Israel is doing to these poor Palestinians. It's just not true. Again, let's do a thought experiment here. Do the Palestinians have nuclear weapons? As far as we know, no. There's no indication that they have nuclear weapons. Does Israel have nuclear weapons? Yeah. They got a lot of them. So if Israel wanted to genocide the Palestinians, they could do it in an afternoon. They know where all of them are. You drop several nukes, not only do you destroy all the hundreds of miles of terror tunnels underneath Palestine, and then that goes into other countries as well, you destroy all of the people, the combatants and non-combatants. And you do it like that. Boom, just done. They haven't done that. They haven't done anything close to that. Israeli military members are being killed on the regular because they're not just dropping bombs and killing everybody. They're not just carpet bombing this entire area and turning Palestine into a parking lot. It's because they're trying to not kill civilians. So they're literally giving up their lives to not kill civilians that also hate them. See, we get this idea that these Palestinian civilians, that most of them, yes, there are Christians there are people there that don't agree with what's happening with Hamas, and they don't agree with any of that. But most people in Palestine agree with what Hamas did last year. They supported it. They welcomed all of these terrorist fighters back with open arms and to cheers and adulation. So, yes, they may not have AK-47s in their hands, but they are super in support of the people that are doing those things, which doesn't mean that they deserve to die. Don't hear what I'm not saying, but they are complicit in this ideology. Okay? And so this idea that what Israel's doing is somehow too heavy-handed is obnoxious. It's ridiculous. And to see countries like the United States start to pull back from Israel, well, guess what? Israel, do what you got to do in Rafah and in the rest of Palestine to eradicate Hamas. Do whatever it takes. Preserve as much human life as is possible in this conflict, but you cannot pull back. You cannot teach these Muslim fundamentalist terrorist groups, you cannot teach them that you can kill hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of our people. You can take a lot of them captive. And if you just hold out long enough, we'll quit. I am fully in support of Israel, and I will continue to do so. Our last quick hitter here. Co-President Biden's attempt to buy votes by forgiving over $1 billion of student loan debt. So this is according to the U.S. Department of Education. The Biden-Harris administration on February the 21st announced that it will automatically discharge $1.2 billion in loans for nearly 150,000 borrowers who are eligible for the shortened time to forgiveness benefit under President Biden's Saving on the Value of Education plan. That's called SAVE. The action comes as 7.5 million borrowers are now enrolled in SAVE, 4.3 million of whom have a $0 monthly payment. With today's announcement, we are once again sending a clear message to borrowers who have low balances. If you've been paying for a decade, you've done your part and you deserve relief, said U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona. Under President Biden's leadership, our administration has now approved loan forgiveness for nearly 3.9 million borrowers, and our historic fight to cancel student debt isn't over yet. Right to the big takeaways on this one. Obviously, this is buying Democrat votes with U.S. taxpayer money. That's what this is. There literally is no other reason to do it. Because what these Democratic voters or what these people that are getting their loans forgiven don't understand is you're still paying for that. But all of us are now paying for it. Because there's no such thing as loan forgiveness. There's only something called loan transferal. And so you think, oh, my debt has been forgiven, without realizing that you are going to be paying that debt along with the other 300 plus million people in this country, of a portion of which actually pay the taxes. Your children, your grandchildren, if this country's still around, your great-grandchildren will be paying this off. There's no such thing as loan forgiveness, only transferal. Even look at it in a gospel context. God didn't just say, all right, sins are forgiven. We're good. This is what a lot of atheists want, is like, why would a good God have to require something to pay for sin? Why can't he just forgive it? Because that's not how things work. That's not how things work. If you owe me $100 and I say, hey, I've forgiven your debt, the $100 doesn't just disappear. I'm still out that $100, right? I'm paying the cost of that. That's why God had to send himself through the form of his only son to die on a cross so that we could have propitiation for our sin debt. Propitiation is a payment that satisfies. That's what that means. Thank you, Joe B. Martin, for teaching us that. But that's required. That's how you get to forgiveness. God has transferred your debt onto himself, onto the triune God, onto the Son of the Father. That's what has happened, right? So again, this is a ploy. We will likely see another round of this happen before the end of the year, but this is just kind of what we have to deal with now. So again, guys, thank you so much for listening to the show today. Before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. Please support the people that support the show. So please support Jocko Fuel. Please support Primal Beef. We love those guys. They were great with us even during our little bit of a break. Again, if you're not a monthly donor and you're wondering how in the world is this content able to be produced, it's because we have monthly donors hopping on board. And again, guys, there's a lot of stuff in the show notes today for you guys to check out. So everything that I talked about during the IVF stuff and also during the quick hitters, it's in the show notes as well. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And also, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.